Rude's shocking death wasn't just tragic. It was mysterious, sudden, and filled with unanswered questions. A man once admired for his sculpted physique and cocky swagger was gone far too soon. But how did it really happen? And what was the untold story behind the accident that took him from this world? To understand the bizarre circumstances surrounding his death, we have to go back to the final chapter of Rickrude's life, a time when he was no longer dazzling fans in the ring, but instead battling pain, regret, and whispers of a comeback. On April 20th, 1999, the wrestling world was hit with a jolt. Rickrude, real name Richard Irwin Rude, was found dead in his home in Alpharetta, Georgia. He was only 40 years old. The cause? A heart attack. But beneath that simple explanation lay a deeper, more complicated truth. Toxicology reports revealed a lethal mix of prescription drugs, painkillers, muscle relaxers, steroids. Many believe it wasn't just an accident, it was the final breaking point of a body that had been pushed beyond its limit. You see, Rickrude had been preparing for a comeback. After suffering a serious back injury in 1994 that forced him into early retirement, he had been healing, training, and even negotiating a return to the ring. He wanted to wrestle again. But he was also reportedly using performance-enhancing drugs to get back into his old shape. His body, already worn down from years of punishment, couldn't take it anymore. Some who were close to him say he was in tremendous pain in the final months of his life. Others say he looked fine, like the old ravishing Rick. But in truth, he was fighting a war inside, physically and emotionally. But Rickrude's story isn't just about a tragic end. His career was filled with bold moves, controversies, and clashes with wrestling's biggest names. And to truly understand why his death struck such a deep chord, you have to understand the man behind the mustache. Rude wasn't just another flashy character in spandex. He was a no-nonsense guy in a wild industry. He didn't kiss up to promoters. He didn't play politics backstage. And that led to some serious drama. One of the biggest controversies of his career came in 1997, when he appeared on 2 wrestling shows on the same night. That's right, Rickrude made history by showing up on WWF's Raw and WCW's Nitro on the very same Monday night, during the height of the Monday Night Wars. One was live, one was taped, and fans were left speechless. It was a bold move, a middle finger to Vince McMahon after Rude felt betrayed by the infamous Montreal Screwjob. He had been a loyal member of D-Generation X, but after seeing how Bret Hart was treated, he walked away. No hesitation, no warning. That was Rickrude, always standing by what he believed in, even if it cost him everything. But beneath all the confidence and rebellion was a man quietly breaking down. Years of wear and tear had caught up to him. Back in 1994, Rude suffered a devastating back injury during a match in Japan. It wasn't a flashy moment. There was no dramatic collapse or ambulance, but something cracked inside him, literally. Doctors told him he had to retire. Not should, had to. His spine simply couldn't take the pressure anymore. For someone like Rickrude, that news felt like a prison sentence. Wrestling wasn't just a job. It was his identity. He wasn't ready to walk away. So even after retiring from active competition, Rude stayed close to the business. He took on roles that kept him on TV, like managing, commentating, or just being a tough presence at ringside. He became a key figure in groups like D-Generation X and later the New World Order in WCW. Fans still saw him on screen, still heard his voice, still felt his presence, but for Rick, none of it replaced being in the ring. And deep down, he wanted to wrestle again. That's where things took a dangerous turn. By the late 1990s, rumors began swirling that Rude was training for a return. He was only in his late 30s, still young by wrestling standards. He had reportedly begun working out intensely and using steroids to rebuild the body he was once famous for. He wanted to look like ravishing Rickrude again. The goal wasn't just about looks. It was about proving something to himself, but he was also battling constant pain. To manage it, he was taking multiple medications, painkillers, muscle relaxants, and other prescriptions. The mix of these drugs with steroids created a dangerous cocktail that slowly damaged his body, especially his heart. Those around him noticed changes. Some said he looked strong again. Others said he seemed distant, even tired. Moreover, Rude's career was filled with controversy, even behind the scenes. He was never one to play the political game. If he had a problem with management, he'd speak up directly. That didn't always go over well in a business built on ego and backstage alliances. In 1992, he had a serious falling out with Vince McMahon. One issue was money. Rude felt he wasn't being paid what he was worth. Another issue involved creative direction. He wanted better stories, better matches, and more respect. When those things didn't come, he left the company. After suffering his career-ending injury in Japan, Rude didn't go quietly. He filed a lawsuit against Lloyd's of London, the insurance company covering wrestlers who suffered permanent injuries. The policy was supposed to help injured wrestlers financially after forced retirement. Rude's claim was part of a growing trend of wrestlers taking legal action just to stay afloat. Ironically, the same insurance policy that gave him financial security also kept him from wrestling again. If he returned to the ring, he'd lose the payout. So he was stuck, wanting to wrestle, but legally blocked from doing so unless he paid the money back. That's part of what made his situation so frustrating and sad. On screen, Rickrude was all bravado, stripping off his robe, flexing his muscles, and insulting local crowds in every town. He'd call the men sweat hogs and tell the women to keep their eyes on a real man. It was classic heel work. Fans hated him, but they loved to hate him. Off-screen, though, Rude was surprisingly quiet. He valued privacy. He had a wife, kids, and lived far from the spotlight. Friends said he didn't party much. He wasn't into wild road stories or late-night chaos like many wrestlers from that era. In fact, he often skipped the after-show hangouts just to get home to his family. But even that life was affected by the toll wrestling had taken. Chronic pain, mental stress, and the constant pressure to look like the old Rude stayed with him. He may have been private, but he wasn't immune. The sad truth is, Rickrude's death followed a heartbreaking pattern in pro wrestling. The 80s and 90s were full of stars who died young, due to drugs, health issues, or simply from pushing their bodies beyond the limit. Mr. Perfect, Owen Hart, the British Bulldog, Eddie Guerrero, and the list goes on. Rude's name is often grouped with those stories, but his case was a bit different. His death wasn't public. It wasn't part of a scandal or high-speed chase. It happened quietly, at home, while he was trying to come back. That's what makes it so haunting. He was trying to rebuild and didn't make it in time. Years later, fans still talk about Rickrude with respect. He wasn't the loudest guy in the locker room, but he was one of the best. He could wrestle with anyone. He had a natural charisma that didn't feel forced. And unlike many others, he protected his character. He never broke kayfabe, even when cameras weren't rolling. In 2017, WWE finally honored him with an induction into the Hall of Fame. His family was there. Fans gave him a long, standing ovation. The stories shared that night weren't just about his muscles or arrogance. They were about his work ethic, his loyalty, and the impact he made in such a short time. If Rickrude's story hit you like it hit us, quietly powerful and painfully real, then don't let it fade. Hit that like button to keep his legacy alive, and subscribe for more untold stories from the world behind the curtain.
Well, a moral victory indeed for the Junkyard Dog.
The tragic end of Junkyard Dog was one of the most heartbreaking moments in wrestling history. The horrific car accident that claimed his life didn't just take away a legend, it left countless fans in shock and sorrow. Today, let's not only reflect on the pain of that accident, but also celebrate the incredible career that made him a beloved icon who still lives on in our hearts. Junkyard Dog died on June 2nd, 1998. He was only 45 years old. His death came suddenly and tragically. He was driving back home from his daughter LaToya's high school graduation in North Carolina when he suffered a fatal heart attack behind the wheel. His car veered off the road in Mississippi, ending the life of a man who once electrified arenas with raw charisma and unshakable energy. The world of wrestling mourned his passing, but behind the tributes and kind words lay a harsher truth. Junkyard Dog didn't get the ending he deserved. His life had spiraled in the years after the bright lights faded. He had battled drug addiction, faced financial problems, and dealt with being pushed aside in an industry he helped build. While many legends were honored with grand send-offs and Hall of Fame moments, Junkyard Dog's final years were quiet, his struggles largely forgotten by a business that had moved on. His story is a reminder that fame is fleeting, and the fall from the top can be just as dramatic as the rise. But to truly understand why the Junkyard Dog deserved better, we need to go back and look at how he became one of wrestling's biggest stars. He was born on December 13th, 1952, in Wadesboro, North Carolina. A natural athlete, He played football at Fayetteville State University, where he majored in political science. Standing 6 feet 3 inches and weighing over 280 pounds, Ritter had the size and strength that made him a perfect fit for football. He even had a shot at the pros, briefly attending training camp with the Green Bay Packers. But after an injury derailed that dream, Ritter found a new path: professional wrestling. He made his wrestling debut in 1977, training under Larry Johnson and breaking in with smaller promotions. Early on, he wrestled under names like Leroy Rochester and Big Daddy Ritter, but it wasn't until he landed in Mid-South Wrestling under promoter Bill Watts that everything changed. It was there that the Junkyard Dog persona was born, complete with a dog collar, chains, and a no-nonsense attitude that connected instantly with fans. Mid-South Wrestling in the early 1980s was one of the hottest territories in the country, and Junkyard Dog was its biggest attraction. What made him different wasn't just his power or presence, it was the way fans rallied behind him. He wasn't just popular, he was beloved. He represented pride, resilience, and hope for a generation of African-American fans who hadn't seen many heroes who looked like them on TV. And when Another One Bites the Dust by Queen hit the speakers, the crowd erupted. JYD headlined cards all across the region and feuded with some of the biggest heels in the business. His rivalries with Ted DiBiase, the Fabulous Freebirds, and Butch Reed were legendary. One of the most memorable storylines came when the Freebirds blinded JYD with hair cream, forcing him to miss the birth of his daughter in the storyline. It was pure wrestling drama, and the fans ate it up. Ritter's charisma was so strong that he didn't need fancy moves or technical mastery. His headbutts, body slams, and power moves were more than enough to ignite a crowd. But he wanted more. In 1984, he made the leap to Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation, just as the company was going national. McMahon saw the potential in JYD immediately. He was promoted as one of the top babyfaces, second only to Hulk Hogan in popularity for a time. For a black wrestler in the mid-1980s, that was almost unheard of. JYD debuted at a time when the WWF was becoming a pop culture machine. With his chain, bark, and infectious energy, he became a regular on television, featured in music videos, and even starred in the first few editions of WrestleMania. At WrestleMania 1, he faced Greg the Hammer Valentine for the Intercontinental Championship and won the match by countout. Though he didn't take the title, it was clear that McMahon saw him as a key piece of the puzzle. In 1986, Junkyard Dog won the Wrestling Classic Tournament, one of WWF's first major pay-per-view events. That same year, he was voted Most Inspirational Wrestler by Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Kids adored him. His action figure sold like crazy, and his matches were always met with loud cheers and barking from the crowd. It was rare for any wrestler to have this level of connection with the audience, and JYD had it in spades. But as the years went by, things started to change. Behind the scenes, Ritter's personal life was unraveling. He had developed a serious drug problem, primarily cocaine, which began affecting his performances and his relationships with others in the locker room. His conditioning suffered, and he began to lose the edge that had once made him so electric. The WWF, now filled with younger and faster stars, slowly began phasing him out. By 1988, he was gone from WWF and working with Jim Crockett Promotions, which soon became World Championship Wrestling. While he still had name recognition, his role had diminished. In WCW, he was mostly used in mid-card matches or in tag teams. His feud with Ric Flair briefly reignited fan interest, but it never reached the same heights. He did have some notable moments, like teaming with Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson, and even appearing at Clash of the Champions, but he was clearly a star in decline. Despite his setbacks, he never stopped trying. He worked for independent promotions throughout the 1990s, often making appearances in smaller towns and old-school territories. His body had taken a beating, and he was no longer the powerhouse he once was, but fans still remembered. Wherever he went, they still barked for him. He gave them whatever he had left. But the years of physical punishment, substance abuse, and emotional strain had taken a toll. Ritter reportedly spent time in drug rehab and tried to clean up his life in the 1990s. He had periods of sobriety and was working to rebuild his relationship with his daughter. At the time of his death, he was finally in a better place, proud to see his daughter graduate, proud to be a father who was present. That makes the way he died even more tragic. He wasn't in the middle of a relapse. He wasn't spiraling. He was driving home after celebrating one of the most important days in a parent's life. His sudden heart attack cut short any chance at long-term redemption or a full-circle comeback. Just silence. WWE did eventually honor him, but it took time. In 2004, 6 years after his death, Junkyard Dog was posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame by his old rival, Ernie Ladd. His daughter LaToya accepted the award on his behalf. It was a touching moment, but many fans still felt it came too late. Today, Junkyard Dog isn't mentioned as often as the Hogans, Savages, or Warriors of his era, but he was just as vital to the golden age of wrestling. He wasn't the best technician. He didn't have a ton of titles, but he had something much rarer: heart, connection, and soul. He made people care. And in wrestling, that's everything. The sad truth is that JYD's story follows a pattern we've seen too often in wrestling: a meteoric rise, a crash fueled by personal demons, and a tragic end that leaves fans wondering what could have been. But Junkyard Dog's legacy shouldn't be defined by how it ended. It should be remembered for the joy he brought, the barriers he broke, and the millions who barked along with him. He was a symbol of hope for many, a hero to kids who didn't have many heroes, a powerhouse who walked through the crowd with a chain around his neck and love in his heart. He gave wrestling his everything, and in return, wrestling gave him fame, pain, and eventually silence. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. We'll catch you in the next one.
1 minute left, 1 minute. The headbutt from Bobo Brazil. Brazil levels past the headbutt. He's on top.
His name once filled arenas, but today, Bobo Brazil's legacy is nearly forgotten. He was a trailblazer who broke racial barriers in professional wrestling and opened doors for countless others. Yet when he passed away, the world barely noticed. How did one of wrestling's most important pioneers fade into silence? In this video, we uncover the story of his rise, his quiet final years, and why Bobo Brazil's impact deserves to be remembered. In January 1998, Bobo Brazil passed away quietly in his hometown of Benton Harbor, Michigan. He had been suffering from a series of strokes, and at 73 years old, his body finally gave out. There were no massive televised tributes or crowded memorials like we sometimes see for wrestling legends today. Instead, Bobo's death was marked with a subtle respect from those who remembered the giant man who once stood tall as a groundbreaking hero in professional wrestling. After his wrestling career ended, Bobo Brazil faded from the public eye. Unlike many wrestlers who struggle with life after the ring or cling to the spotlight, Bobo chose a quieter path. He didn't chase fame or controversy. Instead, he returned home to live a peaceful life, running a small restaurant and spending time with his family away from the bright lights and roaring crowds. His once booming presence in arenas across America was replaced by the calm of small-town living. This retreat into obscurity might seem surprising given how important Bobo Brazil was to wrestling's history, but it was also a reflection of his character. Bobo was never flashy or attention-seeking. His power was quiet, his confidence steady. So while younger generations of fans may not know his name well, those who do understand that he was a pioneer. His story is one of breaking barriers, standing tall in the face of racism, and changing the face of wrestling forever. Bobo Brazil was born Houston Harris in 1924 in Little Rock, Arkansas, but he grew up in Benton Harbor, Michigan. From a young age, he was a big and strong boy, eventually growing into a towering 6 feet 6 inches and weighing over 270 pounds, an imposing figure in any room. Before he ever stepped into a wrestling ring, Bobo played baseball in the Negro Leagues, a professional league for African-American players at a time when baseball was still segregated. His athletic talents were undeniable, but professional sports offered limited opportunities for black men during those years. His introduction to wrestling came in the late 1940s when a wrestler named Joe Savoldi spotted him and saw potential. Savoldi encouraged Houston Harris to train as a wrestler, and soon he was working hard to learn the craft. He debuted in 1951 under a different name, but it wasn't until he adopted the ring name Bobo Brazil that his career really took off. The name was catchy and memorable, perfect for a wrestler who was about to change the industry. The world of wrestling in the 1950s was very different from today. It was deeply segregated, with black wrestlers often limited to competing only against other black wrestlers and rarely given top billing or serious storylines. But Bobo Brazil refused to be boxed in by those limits. He was one of the first black wrestlers to regularly face white opponents and became one of the first to be booked as a main event star against them. His strength, skill, and dignified presence helped him cross those racial boundaries in a sport that was slow to change. Bobo's wrestling style was straightforward but effective. He wasn't flashy or theatrical in the way many wrestlers are today. Instead, he was powerful and steady, using his size and strength to dominate opponents. His signature move was the Coco Butt, a forceful headbutt that was both feared and respected. It became his calling card and helped build his reputation as a tough competitor. He was also known for his calm and quiet demeanor. Unlike many wrestlers who played exaggerated characters or embraced stereotypes, Bobo simply wrestled as himself, a proud black man who commanded respect in the ring. This approach resonated with fans of all races, making him a beloved figure. His matches often drew huge crowds, and he was a mainstay in territories like Detroit, where wrestling was incredibly popular. One of the most famous chapters of Bobo Brazil's career was his long rivalry with the Sheik, another legendary figure in wrestling. Their feud was intense and brutal, captivating audiences and helping to define the wrestling scene in Detroit during the 1960s. The Sheik played the villain perfectly, while Bobo was the heroic figure fans wanted to see triumph. These matches were often violent and dramatic, blending athleticism with storytelling in a way that wrestling fans still appreciate today. In 1962, Bobo came very close to making history on the biggest stage. He defeated Bubba Rogers for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship in Newark, New Jersey. However, the victory was short-lived. Officials reversed the decision, citing an injury to Rogers and refusing to recognize Bobo as champion. Many believe that racial prejudice played a part in this decision, as it would have been a major milestone to officially crown the first black world champion in wrestling history. Though the official records don't recognize him as champion, many fans and historians argue that Bobo Brazil truly earned that title. Despite the setback, Bobo continued to rack up championships across various territories. He held the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship multiple times and was a respected main eventer for decades. His presence in the wrestling world was a symbol of change. He was breaking down racial barriers without needing to say a word. In the 1970s, as wrestling became more organized under the National Wrestling Alliance and the WWF, Bobo Brazil's career continued to thrive. He wrestled for the WWF starting in 1970, facing off against stars like Gorilla Monsoon, Spiros Arion, and Bruno Sammartino. Though he was past his prime years, Bobo was still a formidable force, and Vince McMahon Sr. made sure to treat him with respect, recognizing the path Bobo had paved. By the early 1980s, Bobo began to reduce his wrestling schedule. The business was changing rapidly, with new stars and new styles emerging. Still, Bobo remained an important figure, occasionally wrestling in special events or making appearances as a respected veteran. His legacy had already been firmly established. In 1994, the WWF finally honored Bobo Brazil's pioneering contributions by inducting him into their Hall of Fame. This recognition was significant because it publicly acknowledged the role he played in breaking racial barriers within professional wrestling. While Bobo accepted the honor with humility, many felt it was overdue. He wasn't the type to demand attention, but the wrestling world needed to remember what he had done. After the Hall of Fame induction, Bobo largely stayed out of the spotlight. He preferred a quiet life in Michigan, far from the drama and flash of the wrestling business. He owned and operated a small restaurant and spent his days with family and close friends. In this way, Bobo Brazil's story is one of humility as much as greatness. His death in 1998 reminded wrestling fans of a true pioneer who had quietly changed the game. While his name might not be as frequently mentioned today as some other wrestling legends, his influence is undeniable. Bobo Brazil helped open doors for countless African-American wrestlers who came after him, from Junkyard Dog to Ron Simmons and beyond. Wrestling today is more diverse than ever, with black wrestlers holding world championships regularly and headlining major shows worldwide. But it's important to remember the path Bobo Brazil blazed. He was the first to prove that race didn't define a wrestler's worth in the ring. He did it with dignity and strength, never compromising his character to fit outdated stereotypes. In 2012, WWE honored Bobo Brazil again by including him in the Hall of Fame's Legacy Wing, which celebrates pioneers who helped shape professional wrestling's early years. It was a quiet acknowledgement, but fitting for a man who never sought the spotlight but always earned respect. Bobo Brazil's story is a reminder that legends don't always need to be loud or flashy. Sometimes their impact is felt quietly but deeply, shaping the future for others to follow. His life and career stand as a testament to perseverance, dignity, and breaking barriers, qualities that every wrestling fan should remember. Though time may have dimmed his name for some, Bobo Brazil remains a true legend, a forgotten hero who deserves to be celebrated not just for what he did inside the ring, but for what he stood for outside of it. His legacy continues every time a wrestler of color steps into the ring and fights to be seen as more than just a stereotype. And that wraps up today's video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an update. Also, drop a comment below and let us know who you want us to cover next. We'll see you in the next one.
The sad truth about Big Boss Man's death is something WWE never really talked about, and it's a story that will shock you to the core. How could he suddenly die at just 41 years old? For years, it felt like a mystery, but when his wife finally opened up, her revelations changed everything. Suddenly, the pieces started to fit together, and people began to see the role WWE may have played in what happened. So, let's dive into this story and uncover what really went on behind the scenes. The truth is, even though Big Boss Man was a spectacular performer in the ring, loved by so many fans, his real life away from the spotlight was nothing like the larger-than-life character people saw on TV. Inside the arena, he was this tough, intimidating figure who made people cheer, boo, and stay glued to their screens. But once the cameras turned off and the lights dimmed, he was just a man whose body had been battered by years of wrestling. Like many of his peers from that era, the physical grind of the business caught up with him. The constant travel, the brutal matches, and the injuries that never fully healed left him struggling more than most people realized. On September 22, 2004, everything came crashing down. At only 41 years old, he died suddenly from a heart attack at his home in Georgia. The news hit like a thunderbolt across the wrestling world. Fans who had grown up watching him couldn't believe it. How could someone who still seemed so strong, so full of life, be gone just like that? His passing wasn't just shocking because of his young age. It was heartbreaking because he was still remembered with so much love by the very people who had cheered him on during his career. But what made his story even more complex was what came later. In the years after his death, his wife Angela began to open up in interviews, sharing details that fans had never known. She revealed the other side of his life, the side filled with constant physical pain that he carried around silently. She spoke about how dedicated he was to his family, how he tried to shield them from his struggles, and how much he fought to keep going even when his health was failing him. Angela painted a picture of a man who pushed himself far beyond his limits, often hiding just how much he was suffering because he didn't want to let down his family or his fans. Her words gave people a new understanding of what he had been going through behind the curtain. Suddenly, his death didn't feel like just a random tragedy. It became clearer how much the relentless demands of wrestling, the punishing lifestyle, the injuries, the stress, had played a part in taking him away too soon. For many fans, hearing Angela's side of the story was like finally putting together the missing pieces of a puzzle. It showed just how much Big Boss Man had sacrificed, not only for his career, but for the entertainment of millions, and how that sacrifice may have ultimately cost him his life. Now, let's take a closer look at his career, the incredible performances that made him a star in wrestling history, but also the same battles in the ring that took such a heavy toll on his body and played a big part in his untimely death. Before he was ever known as the Big Boss Man, Ray Traylor lived a very different life. Long before the bright lights of the wrestling world, he worked as a corrections officer in Cobb County, Georgia. That real-life job would one day inspire one of wrestling's most famous characters, but back then, he was just another young man with a tough, demanding career. Still, something about Traylor stood out. He was a big guy with presence, and eventually, he decided to step into the world of professional wrestling. Traylor made his debut in 1984. Starting out just like many others at the bottom of the card. He worked as what's known in the business as a jobber for Jim Crockett Promotions, which basically meant his role was to make others look good. But it didn't take long for someone important to notice his potential. Dusty Rhodes, who was the head booker at the time, saw something special in him. Dusty pulled him off television for a few months, then brought him back in a new role, Big Bubba Rogers. As Big Bubba, Traylor wasn't just another wrestler. He was repackaged as the silent, intimidating bodyguard for Jim Cornette, who at that time was managing the Midnight Express. Bubba's size, combined with his ability to play the strong, silent type, made him stand out quickly. Soon, he was thrown into a major feud with none other than Dusty Rhodes himself. Their rivalry played out in a series of brutal bunkhouse stampede matches in 1986, where both men ended up tied for wins. That meant a big tiebreaker inside a steel cage, and on February 27th, Dusty picked up the victory. Traylor's career kept moving upward. In 1987, After Jim Crockett purchased the Universal Wrestling Federation, Traylor jumped over to that promotion. He made a splash almost immediately. On April 19th, he defeated the massive one-man gang to win the UWF Heavyweight Championship. For someone who had only been in the business for a few years, this was a huge achievement. After the win, he aligned himself with General Skandor Akbar and his infamous stable, Devastation Incorporated. His reign didn't last long, though. On July 11th, he dropped the title to Dr. Death Steve Williams during the Great American Bash Tour. By 1988, Traylor was expanding his career even further, touring Japan for All Japan Pro Wrestling under his Big Bubba name, but it was later that same year that his career completely changed. In May 1988, he signed with the World Wrestling Federation, and this is where the world was introduced to the character that would define his career, the Big Boss Man. The gimmick was directly inspired by his past life as a corrections officer. Dressed in his blue police shirt, sunglasses, and carrying a nightstick, he quickly became one of the most hated villains in the company. Managed by Slick, the Boss Man had a post-match routine that made fans absolutely despise him. He'd handcuff his defeated opponents to the ropes and beat them with his nightstick or even a ball and chain. It was cruel, and in wrestling, that meant he was doing his job perfectly. Big Boss Man got his first big win at SummerSlam 1988, defeating Koko B. Ware. Soon after, he was thrust into a major feud with the biggest star in wrestling, Hulk Hogan. In October of that year, Boss Man attacked Hogan on the Brother Love Show, setting up one of the WWF's biggest rivalries. But Boss Man wasn't just feuding solo. He also teamed up with another massive heel, Akeem. Together, they were called the Twin Towers. The two quickly became central figures in the storyline that broke up the Mega Powers, Hogan and Randy Savage. Their matches with Hogan and Savage at the main event in early 1989 were dramatic and chaotic, even leading to the infamous backstage fight between the Mega Powers after Savage thought Hogan cared more about Miss Elizabeth than the match itself. At WrestleMania 5, the Twin Towers defeated the Rockers, Shawn Michaels, and Marty Jannetty. Around the same time, Boss Man's feud with Hogan peaked in a series of cage matches. One of their most memorable bouts came on Saturday night's main event in May 1989, where Hogan superplexed the 300-pound Boss Man off the top of the steel cage. It was a jaw-dropping moment for that era. Boss Man kept busy after that. He feuded with Demolition, Dusty Rhodes, and others, but in 1990, he shocked fans by turning face. The storyline began when Ted DiBiase tried to pay him to steal back the $1 Million Championship from Jake the Snake Roberts. Boss Man did take the belt and bag, but when he realized Damien the Python was inside, he refused DiBiase's money and returned everything to Roberts. That act of honor turned him into a fan favorite. As a good guy, Boss Man's career stayed strong. He feuded with Bobby Heenan, Mr. Perfect, and the Mountie, even beating the Mountie in the legendary jailhouse match at SummerSlam 1991, which forced the Mountie to spend a night in jail. Later, he clashed with Nails in one of the WWF's most personal storylines. By early 1993, Boss Man's time in WWF was winding down. His last major feud came against Bam Bam Bigelow, which ended at Royal Rumble 1993. After leaving WWF, he wrestled in various places, including USWA, SMW, and Japan, before signing with WCW. In WCW, he went through several name changes, The Boss, The Guardian Angel, and eventually returning to Big Bubba Rogers. He feuded with top stars like Vader, Sting, and even Hulk Hogan again. For a time, he joined the Dungeon of Doom, then later the NWO, though his stay there was brief. By 1998, he left WCW behind. That same year, he returned to WWF in a completely new look. This time, he wore a black SWAT-style outfit and became Vince McMahon's enforcer in the corporation. He won the Hardcore Championship multiple times, teamed with Ken Shamrock to win the tag team titles, and even had one of the most infamous moments in WrestleMania history, being hanged inside Hell in a cell by The Undertaker at WrestleMania 15. Boss Man stayed busy through the late 1990s, feuding with Al Snow in the bizarre Pepper the Dog storyline, and later with Big Show, which included the infamous segment where he dragged Big Show's father's casket away with a car. It was dark, controversial, and unforgettable. By 2000, his role began to wind down. He teamed with Bull Buchanan for a while, then wrestled on smaller shows, and later helped train younger talent in Ohio Valley Wrestling. His final WWE match came in 2002, and by 2003, he quietly left the company when his contract expired. And that's all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you in the next one. Take care.